You're holding yours, okay.
All right, now that we all have our mics lined up here. My name is Stacey Cochran. I'm the organizer for the Raleigh Write to Publish group. As most of you guys know, how many folks here, quick show of hands, are familiar with the Raleigh Write to Publish group, and that's why you're here tonight? Great. We've got a fantastic discussion, I think, lined up. This is going to be pretty informal. So the topic of tonight's event is going to be how to write a memoir. So what I'd like to do first is just kind of get into why we write memoirs. And maybe have these wonderful writers up here do a little bit of a reading in a few minutes if you guys are up for that at all. So why don't we start with that? Elaine, what was the motivation behind writing Gods of Noonday?
Well, first of all, if I could answer the first question, then I'll answer that. The main reason to write a memoir is because you're the most interesting person you know. And you like yourself more in your own company. So why not keep more of it? I think that's really true. I was motivated in particular because I had a childhood that was a little different from most of the people I'm around. I had grown up in Nigeria. My parents were missionaries. And when people did find this out about me, eventually they would they would kind of look at me like, well, that explains it, you know? And so, and then I also happened to be going through a very difficult illness. And that was a motivation not to wait. So you don't need to wait for that. I think just begin with you're the most interesting person you know. That's my short answer.
Very nice. Maybe that's why I haven't written one. I just don't think I'm very interesting. So Nancy, how about you? You are an interesting person, but was that the reason for writing a memoir?
Not at all. Not at all. I know a lot of interesting people, so I don't think I'm the most interesting person I know. Gosh, maybe I shouldn't say that. Nobody will buy my memoir. But I actually wrote it with the intention that no one would see it. And the more I discovered that people were really interested in me, it really motivated me, and it validated who I was. I had lost myself over the 30 years that the memoir has been written. And in writing this memoir, I not only healed a great pain, I found myself again, and that great creativity that I had before that made me the interesting people that everyone saw that I had kind of forgotten. I remember saying to my coach, "You have helped me remember success. Now I hope success remembers me."
How about some of you guys? Some of you that are working on a memoir or thinking that you're going to write a memoir from the audience? Let's go ahead and get some audience participation here. Why are you writing your memoir? Why don't you announce your name and why are you writing your memoir? Here in the middle.
I'm Jim Astute, so I'm probably the new person on the block here. What I'm writing about is during the Cold War, there were very few people in this country that had very, very high security clearances that worked on all the projects the government swore they were not doing. And I was one of them. There's only, I think I'm the last one that's left that actually worked on everything from Area 51, Nevada test site, crystal skulls, even into some stuff that was involving, you know, pagans. Everybody said you need to sit down and put a book together so everybody understands what went on that everybody in the government said was not going on.
Sure.
That's what I'm writing about.
Somebody else. That's fascinating. Here, Brenda.
I'm Brenda Bartella-Peterson, and I'm almost finished.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I'm working with Peggy Payne. She's been editing for me, and I'm almost finished. And I'm one of those people who has been told all of my life, you need to write this down. People won't believe it. And I didn't want to. And it is only age that has convinced me, okay, there's something others could learn from this. And at first, I made it, I took my stories and chose values that I felt like the stories represented. And in working with Peggy Payne, she said, Brenda, the story is your life, not the values that you choose to talk about it. So then I made the big switch over to strict memoir. And I mean, I'm still in the end getting probably a little preachy because I'm an ordained minister, but it's been fun, and I didn't anticipate that it would be fun. I thought it would be agony, and it's been fun.
That raises an interesting question. So, as a teacher, as a professor, Elaine, how do you think about writing your memoir? Did you think about writing your memoir as a lesson that someone else could learn from, or was it something that you could learn from, or how do you balance that?
I absolutely did not write it as something for my students to learn from. I wasn't teaching creative writing until I published a memoir. I really wrote it, I think, for myself, very largely. And it sounds like it sounds like you're writing it really for a larger audience. You're anticipating that, and some of the rest of you. I think as you're working at some point, you really have to become aware of audience. But I think initially, I was really writing for myself. And I'm trying to think if I can segue into your question more satisfactorily. Certainly writing the memoir and publishing it and now writing fiction has opened new avenues of teaching for me. And I love it. I love watching students get excited about writing creatively. It's the best teaching, the most enjoyable teaching I've ever done. And I think I think we want to tell stories. I think it's so deep in us as human beings to tell stories. Someone over here was talking about oral storytelling and how when there are opportunities for people to tell stories, you learn things that you'd never known before, and how that's sort of absent from our culture and our practice of living together now. So that's why we're all here tonight, right? Because we want to hear each other's stories and we want other people to hear ours. What did you
learn from writing Gods of Noonday that you didn't already know? How did putting it all together, reorganizing your memories and your thoughts, how did that change it? Well, you don't have time for all that, for everything. But one of the biggest things I learned was how profoundly my life had been influenced by larger historical currents. We think we live our lives in relative isolation, so I thought I was this sort of isolated little white girl born in Nigeria who grew up there and had this sort of odd, kinky little experience. But in fact, I lived through a civil war. I was living through the 60s, but I was in Nigeria. There was the Cold War, which was influencing, Russia and the United States. It was the Soviet Union were vying for power in Africa. I mean, there were these huge global struggles that were occurring. Oil was basically discovered in my backyard in Nigeria. No one knew there was oil in Nigeria when I was born, and now, of course, Nigeria is one of the largest providers of oil for the United States, and it's been huge in that country. And so how we are shaped by history, even if we are in some minor little village on the globe, was a huge lesson to me. And I always want my students to think about that. What has been happening historically in your life, connect your life. When you were in the second grade, what was going on? I like that kind of deep research, and maybe it partly comes out of my being a scholar first. Mm-hmm. What is the biggest challenge that you see in aspiring memoir writers, in students that you teach at NC State, as they're beginning to conceive of and think about their memoir? Are there consistent things that you see from semester to semester that somebody here could learn from to avoid, perhaps, or circumvent?
I'll put it more positively, and I'll say, love your material. What your material is what you have to write about, and that's what you should care about. You should be reading other memoir. You can be reading fiction, you can be reading anything, but don't imagine that you need to have had a certain kind of life. Love your material, find your voice. I started by saying you're the most interesting person you know, but really I think I only know that now that I wrote my memoir. I thought I had kind of I didn't think anyone would be interested in a Southern Baptist girl who grew up and her parents were missionaries. It's so boring, and I went to GAs, and I was so good, and nothing ever bad happened, and my parents were not dysfunctional, and you know, it was. I didn't really have any hot boyfriends. And so, what was there to say? Well, but then there was a lot to say. So I think loving your material and going deeply in it, writing down what you know, writing it into a journal, longhand, love your, when I say love your materials, I, of course, first of all mean your story, but I also bought kind of expensive pens and nice notebooks. I mean, I wanted everything about the experience of writing to be aesthetically pleasing as I was doing it.
Very cool. Nancy, how about you? What did you learn through the process of writing?
Well, I wrote on napkins, I wrote on paper towels, I wrote on my car seat, and then I couldn't trade my car in. I had the total opposite experience. I would literally be in traffic and start writing whatever was near, coffee cup, and I almost felt like I was being trampled by this rush of emotion, and sometimes it would paralyze me. And I would be there in cars blowing their horn and thinking, I cannot move. I have to write this down. So you need to bleep, bleep, bleep around me because I am not moving right now. And when you live in Italy, that's not something you want to do because they will drive over you. It was just very organic, and I think later to organize it, much to the credit of my readers and my editors and my coach, it was very difficult because there was no rhyme or reason to it. But I think it's very important, and what I say to someone that wants to write a memoir is if you overthink it, you will never write it. Someone said to me, well, first you need to take a typing class because you don't know how to type. And I said, well, I can write it in longhand and then pay someone to type it because that's what I did all through college. And they were like, no, you have to take a typing class, you have to learn. Or you could do shorthand, and everything was just so complicated. And I said, by the time I learn all this stuff, I'm gonna be dead, and I won't have this written. So I would say, don't overthink it, just start writing. Commit yourself to writing a page a day, and good, bad, and ugly, and then organize it.
But what did you learn? What did you learn? You've written about a very painful period of your life. What did you learn?
Not to listen to anybody. I mean, quite honestly, because I wouldn't not have finished it. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about the Italian culture, which growing up Italian, I thought I knew it all, but I didn't realize you marry a good woman that's going to be a good wife and mother, and then you have the woman you love on the side. I mean, nobody told me that. I was 21 when I got married, and that was a very painful lesson to learn because my parents were both Italian, but they didn't follow those rules. They loved each other, and they lived by their own rules, and I guess I do too.
Excellent answer. So what kinds of challenges are you guys facing as you're writing your memoirs? What kinds of issues, what kind of roadblocks are you facing? There's a comment here in the middle.
Paralysis from pain. Getting to a point where it's so painful to write down the words that I have to stop.
Like physically painful?
Yeah.
Elaine, can you address that? The question, or
physically painful, not emotionally, but physically.
Well, emotional.
Okay.
But it shows itself on the physical.
Do you want to answer?
Do you like wine? I actually have brought a wine guy if you would like some selections. I think just breathe, light a candle. It was almost holy when I'd get to those points. Like I said, it was painful when you were in a car because you really had to get from point A to point B, and all of a sudden you were overcome, and I just felt like I couldn't drive, I couldn't do anything. But if I was home and I was writing and I got to that point, I would really just try to go back into who I was and maybe look at pictures or try to remember things that were a little bit better. A lot of things that helped me are, I was a fashion designer, and I would go back and look at my sketches, the few sketches that I had here in America, and it helped me remember a more successful time in my life. And if you don't have any of those happy memories, call a friend, have them come over and maybe have them write it for you. I had to do that with one of the most painful parts of my book. Anora Magaha sat there and typed a whole morning and interviewed me as if she were a police officer. And that's how we got three chapters written, because I could not write them, and there was a big hole in the middle of my memoir. So that's what I would do.
That's great advice. Go ahead, Elaine.
Oh, I was just going to add to that a couple of thoughts. That's such a wonderful answer, and so marvelous that you had someone who would help you that way. And I think maybe others of us do, but we won't ask. So I think that's wonderful. It's so important for writers. This is not the answer. This is something else. But to have readers and to have a community of writers, and that's what Stacey and you all are doing together. This sounds like a song. You know, nobody can write alone. If anyone can write alone, I don't know who they are. I think we all have to have readers. You know, we have to have feedback, and but the idea that someone would actually help you write is such a marvelous idea. I have two thoughts. One, in Hemingway's memoir from Paris, what was the name of that early memoir? What was it? Didn't we read it? Hemingway's memoir, A Movable Feast. He talks about writing one honest sentence. When he would get to a point that he didn't think he could write anymore, he would think, well, I just need to write one more honest sentence, even if it takes all afternoon. And then I think he went drinking. I don't. Maybe he, in cafes, I think he was drinking and trying to write one more honest sentence. The other thing I really, really believe in is writing about what's around you, even while you're writing, so that if you get to a painful place, let's say you can look out the window and there's just this sort of incredible blue jay in the bare dogwood. Write about that. It will be about your memoir. It won't be you're not escaping, you're going deeper. And in your final draft, do that. Have what you're observing and what's in the world around you, have your story interlaced with that. It's going to take you, it's not taking you away from the story, it's taking you deeper into it. So it'll feel like a relief from that pain, and you'll be able to come back, I think, to writing what you felt was hard to write.
Other challenges or obstacles that you're facing here?
Mine just feels like it's so long and it goes on. I'm handwriting too, and there's some pain in there too. but it seems like I filled like 2 or 3 of these 200-page notebooks. And it just like, you know, it's like Gone with the Wind. You know, it's like, will anybody read something? I mean, or am I just going to have to cut it back to half of its length?
I actually spun out another book out of my book. I'm a very funny person. I didn't have a very funny life. So what I did is I took these funny little stories that kind of framed my life, this very dramatic memoir, and I put them in another book that I'm finishing and polishing up right now. And you might find that there's a couple themes in what you're writing and divide it up into different books, because if it's too long, you may lose people. And I know with mine, I grew up above a bakery, and my dad is hysterical. He's very creative, he's very childlike. I mean, he's almost 80, and I'm like 15 in my mental state, and my dad's like 10. And we just, when we get together, we do very crazy things, and it was like that the whole time I was growing up. So you have that, and you have this dramatic story of infidelity, of rape. It just didn't fit in the same book. So that's what I would do, is maybe, and try even reading it aloud and recording it and seeing if you can find some central themes in the emotion.
Well, it has a very central theme. Mm-hmm. And I've like tried to pare things down so that it's just about that.
Yeah.
And it just still seems very long.
Well, War and Peace was really long.
Yeah. That wasn't a memoir. Yeah, Gone with the Wind was long too.
Elaine, how do you know what needs to be in the book? I mean, isn't that sort of the $10 million question? You know, how do you know what's supposed to be in a memoir? You've got literally an infinite number of experiences.
Right. I think it. Of course, people are at different stages of their writing here. Some of you maybe haven't even begun. You're thinking about it. Some of you are almost through. Some of you are passed through. It was very helpful for me to know that I was going to write about 15 years. I was going to write about my first 15 years in Nigeria, from birth to when I left. So I had a frame. And then I did write about my adulthood because I got really, really ill as I was writing the memoir. And so the illness had to become part of the memoir. So it was sort of my present life and the illness and writing the memoir. And the present life became the backbone of the story, and then I kept sort of diving into the past. And that was the sort of deep story, and it's the bigger story in the book. So I would say if you're at an early stage, or even if you're at a revising stage, if you could think about segments of time. I mean, the definition of memoir as opposed to autobiography is that autobiography is a whole life, and memoir is a portion of a life, right? So a memoir could be actually a week. It could be a summer, it could be 2 years, it could be your childhood, it could be the span of an illness, it could be the span of a marriage, right? So, of course, that's just time-wise. But then what should be in a memoir? Some people are interested in writing a memoir about a family or a family member, or a crisis. I said to someone earlier as we were sitting, I think if you write your memoir, if you write the first draft or maybe the second draft, you'll begin to see, though, that there's something else at work in it. There's another level of story, and I think there should be, so that you might write about a crisis or a trauma, but maybe it's also going to be about healing, right? There's going to be some second level that's going to kind of come out that you're going to discover. And I don't think you know that to begin with. But if you can find a way to think about the span of time that you're interested in, what is it that makes this particular part of your life what you want to write about, that gives you a natural framework.
That's great. Excellent. So one question I'm sure some people have considered as they're writing a memoir, or at least I'm curious about it, is how do you depict people who you don't see as favorable, somebody who you don't like? How do you ethically, write about other people who are real people?
I changed their names. I mean, that was one. Well, I was at a memoir class, and there was a woman that was probably in her late 70s, and she said that she had waited up until that point to write it because everyone was dead. She didn't want to upset anyone. And I can remember sitting across the table from her and looking at her and thinking, I am not waiting until I'm 70 to write this. And I softened a lot of the blows. I wasn't not truthful, but you can say things, and the way I would describe it is it was almost like a mop behind the door and not a killer. There's something behind the door, there's something there, but you don't really know what it is. So I alluded to a lot of things in my memoir and alluded to a lot of the characteristics that these people had, also because my children are going to read it, and there's a lot about their father, and I didn't want them to have a framed idea of him that was as negative as it could have been. So, just politeness.
How would you answer that, Elaine?
Well, I changed one name. My memoir was primarily, about my illness in adulthood and my childhood. I left out portions of my adult life that I just they didn't need to be in this memoir. And it would have been difficult to know how to write about them at the moment that I was writing, and that included my marriage and my son. They didn't really belong in this memoir. They're in there briefly, but they didn't really, this was about my childhood and the illness primarily, and so I didn't have to sort of, I didn't want really to expose them. That sounds terrible. They don't really, there's nothing that much to expose, but do you know what I mean? My son doesn't like it anyway, really, that I have a memoir. And so I did change this one character's name. He was just a very bad boyfriend when I was 15. And he was a kind of Lord of the Rings character, and in a mission school. And I had thought about changing all the names of the white Americans, but then it seemed, my husband said, but why wouldn't you change all the Nigerians' names? I mean, it was kind of like, so you're going to have all the Nigerians' names, but you're going to change all the white Americans. That seems kind of odd. And then I decided that the names were part of the poetry of the book, and I loved the names. So I say do whatever you want. I mean, I think I love your answer, and your memoir was really different from mine. So also do what she says. I think it depends on, what the situation is. I didn't have that many people I disliked that I needed.
So this boyfriend, this Lord of the Rings guy,
that's her next book.
was he a hobbit?
Was he a hobbit?
Or was he like, you said he was sort of a Lord of the Rings guy?
No, he was a meanie.
Oh.
Yeah, he was really, really mean. And this mission school I was in sort of degenerated into this Lord of the Rings situation. It should have, right? I mean, an American white school in Nigeria where we were also sort of affluent, and it really needed to sort of disintegrate it. But it hurt me a lot, the way that it happened. And he had become a missionary himself, so I thought he needed exposing. And everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew. I kept the same initials.
I think there's actually more feedback of the people that say, well, why wasn't I in your book?
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm thinking, why would you be? But I've had more of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I got some of that too.
And so what other challenges, I saw a number of hands when we asked that a minute ago, are you guys facing in your book, here in the middle?
Let's say that the memoir isn't going so well, and it's not very interesting. How much fiction can you put in there to juice it up?
It's the perennial James Fry question. So how much creative license do you have in remembering your life?
I don't know. I think I would make a scene where maybe you've done some drugs or something so that you would have that excuse, or a dream, maybe incorporate a dream so it's not like a bold-faced lie. But I don't know, because I think that's a legal question.
So there's no hard and fast line between so-called memoir, fiction, and, say, autobiography?
That's a great question. I mean, that was really what got James Fry into hot water.
Well, and a few people have been in trouble in the recent.
I think you just, personally, I think you have to be ethical. I mean, if you're stretching the truth to engage an audience to the degree that you're just making stuff up, like your ex-girlfriend committing suicide, or something like that.
Well, at a certain age, there may not be anybody to call you out on it.
If they're dead, I say go with it.
They might come after you afterwards, though.
I would like to say that, the human imagination is always interesting. And I would go deeper into your mind, into your, I thought about dreams, but your interior life is where the real richness is, I think. I don't know, maybe sort of the active memoir has been popularized, where a lot of things are happening kind of in the external life, and we're used to watching things on television or in film, and there's a lot going on. But I think that the real wealth of memoir is the interior life. I mean, if you think of Proust, or you think of Nabokov, you think of the great memoirists, there's such, they just walk to the bathroom and it takes pages, and it's just fabulous because they just write about color and the sound of their mother's voice coming up the stairs in the morning. And I don't know what your topic is, but if you go more into your mind and your interior scape, your inner scape, your inscape, I think that's where anything goes. Anything you tell out of your interior is true. Of course, you let the reader know that, that in a daydream, or but I just think that that's where to go.
Underlying that is maybe a question. I don't want to read too much into it, but it's something that I've struggled with in the book that I'm working on now, which is not a memoir, it's a novel. But up until this book, I don't think I've ever really encountered what I would call writer's block. But the book that I'm working on now, I've been writing for about 1.5 years or 2 years. And I wouldn't call it necessarily writer's block, but I will literally go for a month without writing. And I think I get to a point where all these sort of negative voices in my head are saying, you're no good as a writer, you might as well quit, and it just that kind of negative stuff. How do you refresh your spirit and get through that to actually put something on the page? Even while I'm writing it, I'm thinking, this is terrible. I don't even want to read it because it's terrible. And then typically what will happen is a few days later I'll come back and read it, and it won't be as bad as I imagined it while I was doing it. So how do you get through that?
I think that when you stay away from your writing for over a week, you will have this horrible fear. And the longer you stay away, the greater the fear is that you won't be able to come back into it, that it's not good. So I think that as much as you can stay in it, the better. The other thing that I have found true of writing memoir and fiction is that if I'm really doing my work, and doing my work includes lots of things. It includes reading books that are going to somehow flow into or give energy and support to what I'm writing. It includes going to my writing group, hearing other people read, letting them hear me read. It includes my teaching when I'm teaching writing. It includes every hour that I'm actually writing. I get messages from the cosmos. Yes, this will happen to you, and it is the best part of writing. Gertrude Stein says, the writer has the daily miracle. And every day that you write, well, if you're Gertrude Stein, you'll have a daily miracle, and if you're not Gertrude Stein, you'll get one at least every week. And for example, I've been writing recently because I'm on a sabbatical, which is wonderful. And 2 days ago, I walked down to, and I'm working on a novel in which I'm associating my heroine with birds, and I'm trying to decide how far to go with that. And this is set in 1855 in West Africa. And I walked down to the creek, and I just had this feeling that I needed to look left, and there was a great blue heron. And I've seen a great blue heron in this spot several times since I've been working on this novel. And I was, yes, I should write more about birds. This is the way to go. And then the birds sort of turned back around. It had been looking at me, and then it turned back around and began to walk downstream as if to say, you should follow me. And I've had so many miracles occur with this novel that I'm working on. And it's been a terrible novel until recently. It was just a terrible book because I didn't know what I was doing. But it's finally getting almost good. It's getting good. It is good. But I've been working on it for a long time. And I've been following the heron. And so I've had all these miracles occur. I would love to tell you more later because they're beyond belief.
I think the heron's out in the parking lot.
Probably out anywhere about, yeah. But you didn't answer that. Do you want to answer that?
I was just going to jump in real quick. Jill McCorkle said something. I interviewed her last fall, and she said patience is something that she has really learned as a writer is absolutely invaluable, which kind of, I guess it's a little bit at odds with what you're saying about writing every week. But at the same time, what I took from that was if the story's not there, if the scene is not there, and you haven't had that heron moment, if you haven't had that moment of synchronicity that sort of says this is the direction to go, that what she was kind of saying, at least the way I interpreted it, was to wait, and it will happen. It may be a month, you know.
Yeah.
So I think finding that balance between, you know, trying to write at least once a week and keep it moving is really
I think
critical.
you need to find within the last thing you wrote, if there's one sentence or one theme or one word. There was a passage that I wrote, and there was one word that jumped off the page, and that was disturbo. And it, just seeing it, that one word, I wrote so much on that one word and other things. And just writing from that one word, it stimulated, I don't know, the writing gene, and then the writing flowed again after that. So maybe you might want to go back and look at it, or have someone else